Today, confident or constrained consumer. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Well, latest post covering finance and property news. Australian consumers are starting to spend more as disposable incomes and wealth climb. A welcome boost for the economy that could slow the pace of monetary easing if it persists. That's according to Reserve Bank Governor Michele Bullock. I'm not buying necessarily what she is selling.
On the consumer, well, we had some data today on the national accounts, obviously, and I'd say that for some time we have been predicting that the Australian consumer would start to spend a bit more, and they are, slowly. They're value conscious, and we hear this from our liaison, that people are spending, but they're value conscious. They're starting to spend on non-discretionary items. But we've been expecting this because real disposable incomes have been rising for about a year now. Wealth is rising because housing prices are rising, and normally under those circumstances you would expect to see consumption starting to rise. So we are seeing it come back, and that's welcome. We're seeing the private sector start to demonstrate a little bit more growth now, which I think is positive. What it means for future of interest rates, I don't know at this stage. But all I would say is that it's, if anything, probably it's a little stronger than we thought it would be. So that's good, but it does mean that it's possible that if it keeps going, then there may not be many interest rate declines left to come. But it all depends.
We are seeing the private sector start to demonstrate a bit more growth now, which I think is positive, Bullock said following a lecture in Perth late on Wednesday. She referred to second quarter gross domestic product data released, as I covered yesterday, that showed consumers largely led the better than expected outcome. On the implications for monetary policy outlook, Bullock said the stronger consumer impulse means that it's possible that if it keeps going, then there may not be as many rate cuts as expected to come, but it all depends. Australian consumers are, of course, a mixed bunch, with some feeling pretty happy about the state of their finances, especially if older and mortgage-free, while others are still under significant pressure, given rents are still rising, mortgage rates are still high, and the costs of living are still rising faster than the official CPI series suggests. Therefore, trying to roll data up to an aggregate level is really a fool's errand, given the wide distribution across cohorts and states. It's worth recalling that Australian households are among the most heavily indebted in the world, and they struggled with high borrowing costs and elevated inflation in the post-pandemic period. They have been supported, however, by low unemployment, which currently stands at 4.2%, and household spending accounts for around half of Australia's economy, and as a result, it's closely watched by policymakers. Nevertheless, yesterday we got the ABS data on the national accounts, which showed that GDP per capita rose 0.2% in the second quarter, the first positive for several quarters. That led several of the hosts of economists out there to claim the consumer was back, but not so fast, given that the latest Roy Morgan data showed that although lifting 2 percentage points to 88 last week, the index remains below the 3-year high reached in early August and still way down from the period before COVID. And the 4-week moving average fell 0.6 percentage points to 88.2. And while the short-term economic confidence the next 12 months increased 2.3 percentage points, the median-term economic confidence the next 5 years decreased 0.5 percentage points. And the time to buy a major household item jumped 6.9 points, but it's still in the gutter compared with pre-COVID times. Tarek Brooker just released analysis on real household disposable income per working-aged adult. If we view aggregate living standards through the lens of incomes of only the working-age population, then we're at June 2012 levels in inflation-adjusted terms. And as he says, much of the progress that we've seen on the more headline measure is merely the changing composition and the aging of the workforce. In other words, averages mask. Does it all sound familiar? And in fact, when the working age population is used instead of the broader population to calculate GDP per capita, things look, well, significantly worse too. This leads us to an important question. Are consumers in aggregate confident or still constrained? The answer is some are getting more confident, though many of these have had the means to spend over recent times, whereas those who are constrained by low wages, high costs, especially housing, are still pulling their horns in further. With all that in mind, let's reflect on the latest ABS data which was released today, namely the monthly household spending indicator for July 2025. The monthly household spending indicator is derived using bank transaction data, supermarket transaction data, and new vehicle sales data. The ABS warns that this data is not designed for statistical purposes and varies from the national accounts and retail train turnover series. The bank card transaction data is provided to the ABS by participating banks for statistical production purposes. The data is provided to the ABS following the end of each calendar month. Once all the data is received, it's validated and collated. The data is received in different formats and classifications from the participating banks. Some banks provide data at a low level of categorization, for example, at a bank allocated merchant category level, and others provide categorized data at the ANZIC series of industry classifications. The data is received at different frequencies, daily, weekly, or monthly, and all participating banks provide data at an identifiable state and territory level. The ABS also receives weekly transaction data from the supermarket chain's transactions, which are scanner data captured at the point of sale purchases from supermarkets, and they contain information about transactions, dates, quantities, product descriptions, and values of products sold. The aggregated bank transaction data does not contain information about individuals or households, nor does the data from the supermarkets. And the ABS receives monthly vehicle sales data from the FCAI via the VFAX dataset, and also uses publicly available data on electric vehicle sales from the Electric Vehicle Council, the EVC. These datasets capture vehicle sales within the reference month and contains detailed information about the make, class, and engine type of the vehicles. And note that the source data does not cover the whole population. And in the case of bank data, it does not include all payment types. While cash payments, direct transfers outside the bank, cryptocurrency, and BPay transactions are all forms of household spending, they are not currently included due to lack of available data sources or ability to identify such transactions in the current data sets. So if you make bill payments via BPay, they're out of the series. Now, to try and deal with some of this stuff, the ABS then filters the data and applies various adjustments because, for example, of the potential areas of both undercoverage and overcoverage in the bank card transaction data. Not all Australians are represented within the supplied bank data, resulting in undercoverage of the population. And they also make seasonal adjustments. So all of this means the data is, well, best endeavours. As a result, the ABS says that household spending rose 0.5% in July seasonally adjusted. That followed a rise of 0.3% in June and 1% rise in May. Excluding alcohol and tobacco, spending was up 6.2% over the year. Household spending rose for the third month in a row in July and now has gone up 9 times in the last 10 months. The ABS said household spending is 5.1% higher than the same time last year. That's the highest annual growth since November 2023. Now, a couple of points to make at this point. First, of course, we've had very strong migration. So we've got more households in the country, so you would expect spending to be rising. And secondly, of course, inflation is still very strong, which means that prices are also rising. So again, you would expect this to continue to rise. Actually, this data is relatively meaningless without adjusting 4, the growth in population, and inflation. But as I said at the start, of course, these statistics are a bit wobbly at best. Non-discretionary spending lifted 0.8% over the month, while discretionary picked up slightly at 0.4%. Now, here there is a direct link in rising inflation as some households prioritise things they have to buy, even if they have to pay more. Discretionary spending, of course, did less well as a result. Services drove the gains and helped buffer the post-end-of-year financial sales drop-off, rising 1.6% across the month. The detailed breakdown showed growth in the services-heavy categories. Health saw the strongest lift, up 1.8% over the month, followed by miscellaneous goods and services at 1.5%, transport at 1.5%, hotels and cafes and restaurants at 1.4%, and recreation and culture up 0.2% over the month. Services spending has accounted for nearly 3/4 of the headline annual growth. Therefore, goods spending fell 0.3 percentage points over the month, in line with the post-sale drop-off. The falls were in food, down 0.1%, clothing and footwear, down 1.2%, furnishing and household equipment, down 1.4%, and alcohol and tobacco, down 1.9% over the month. The state detail showed a strong 1.6% month rebound in Western Australia. That's the strongest lift in a year, following on from a 0.4% fall last month. South Australia and Queensland were next in line, up 0.9%, followed by Victoria, up 0.6%, but New South Wales was the only mainland state to see a fall, down 0.3 percentage points. So standing back, the data is suggesting that prices for consumer goods are rising more quickly than the RBA model forecast they would. That suggests that inflation is not falling as fast as they expected, and wages growth was running at more than 1 percentage points above the levels consistent with the RBA's 2 to 3% inflation target. Unit labour costs, difference between wages and productivity, rose by 0.7% in the June quarter to be 4.4% higher in annual terms. This means that the economy is still very near full capacity, and it's not clear whether inflation could actually fall. More likely, it could rise, which means that consumers are going to be caught, with some holding their levels of confidence up, but others still feeling the draft from recent monetary policy and continued falls in real wages, which is great for some perhaps, but not for the majority. And it suggests to me that the path for interest rates could well be more tricky than many are spruiking at the moment. Bottom line is this: sure, some are doing okay, but some are not. Put your comment below. Which category are you in? Are you finding things going gangbusters, or are you still struggling? I'd be interested to know. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.